Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
Okay, this should be a really cool episode for us to put together. I don't think when we look back at our relationship with Sukup that we have ever helped our listeners compile a process and what it takes to put together a grain receiving facility.
Right, and I've been dealing with it a lot, dealing with an existing site that was put up, actually it was never like 1970. It was probably like 1970, then 1978, and probably
Right.
skipped the 80s, and then 1990, like my grandpa pieced it all together, and trying to figure out how to update that or trying to figure out how to start a new site, that's a big task to handle.
Well, it is, and as we started putting notes down based upon the conversation that you and I have had around your facility project you're working on, there's so many things to consider.
Oh, man. So many.
So we are excited to have who's become a good friend of ours, Kent here from Sukup. Just because the number of shows that we've hung out together, it's almost like we're friends.
It's been a few, hasn't it?
At some point, we just need to have a Sukup shirt on, probably.
There
we
you go.
should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have our own little lead pad.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Corey, you just described about 90% of the farms that I deal with throughout Iowa and Missouri and the territory that I cover.
Right.
That key decision of trying to decide, do I continue to add on to something that was started 50, 60 years ago,
Yeah.
or do I decide to move on and try something new?
Right.
So let's first get you introduced to our audience. What's your name? What's your role with Sukup?
My name is Kent Kraton. I'm the territory sales manager for most of Iowa and Missouri. I've been with the company going on 31 years. I've had a couple different roles there. I started out in engineering drafting and took over as a safety director and handled a lot of the OSHA and EPA regulations for the company throughout the 90s. And then we came out with the very first portable grain dryer in 98, and I put my name in the hat for a sales position on the dryer line and handled that from 99 until 2004, where I took over as a territory sales manager and handled all the products for Sukup throughout Iowa and Missouri. So,
Dang.
Wow. That's some pretty good perspective.
Yeah.
I've
Seen
got
it
some
all.
history. Yeah.
Were you originally from the Sheffield area?
Yeah, I actually grew up on a farm just outside of Sheffield, about 3 miles outside of town, and graduated from Sheffield High School.
Yep.
Actually, I was the first graduating class of Sheffield, Chapin, Missouri, Thornton. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
So Sukup has been a really big deal for the local economy there, right?
Oh, it's been a huge factor for us the whole time I've been around. So, the company is actually celebrating their 60th year this year.
Yep.
So I graduated high school in 1989, and Sukup has been there and thriving ever since I've known them. So,
Right.
I think that's just one of the most amazing things. I can't remember the population of Sheffield, but it's almost the same population as the employees that you have.
I want to say we have around 800 employees right now, and I think the population of Sheffield is somewhere around 11 or 1,200.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing.
yeah. We draw
You
from
got
about,
a thumbs up from the team, so you must have had your numbers right.
Well, good. I try to get my numbers correct. I don't remember names well, but I'm pretty good with numbers. So it's been a fun adventure to see the company continue to grow. When I started there, I'm gonna guess back in 30 some years ago, there was maybe 150 full-time people at that time. So it's really grown a lot.
So Eugene would have been your boss when you
Yeah.
started.
Well, Charles and Steve were involved, but Eugene was still very involved at that time. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's cool.
Okay, so now let's kind of tackle this project. We have decided as a family or an individual that it is time to address our grain receiving capacity in some form or fashion.
Receiving or storage?
Well,
Or drying.
see, that's the piece is
Exactly right.
what do I need? So how do you go about taking a lead from Farm Progress or from Husker Harvest Days here? How do you go about taking a lead and facilitating someone through that discovery phase?
I would tell you the first thing, as a territory manager, one of the first things I assess is the proximity that they are to one of my closest dealers. Okay, our dealer network is critical for us at Sukup Manufacturing, and those guys they're the field. I mean, they're the ones that are out in the field. They're the ones that are working on the equipment, installing the equipment. They've been around a lot of it. Now, my job is to try to put together a plan with that dealer as to what is best for that farmer. Now, the farmers, they're not uneducated. These guys know
Right.
what works for their site and what doesn't work for their site. We start out with a few key questions, like a lot of times a site visit is the first step.
Right.
Getting on site where we can put some eyes on what they're dealing with. Are they still hauling in with tractors and wagons? Are they hauling in now with semis where they were hauling in with tractors and wagons? So we may have to address a receiving issue there. We start out trying to identify truck traffic patterns, access to a highway or hard surfaced road. And one of the key things that we start out with is power. Do you have three-phase power? Do you have single-phase power? With single-phase power, what kind of capacities are you wanting to hit? Because that may require us to bring in another service where maybe you only have 400 amps and you need 800. And then it starts involving the electric company. Will they provide that second 400 amp service? Or are you at the end of that single-phase line where that's it?
Yeah.
You're just not going to get any more. And I'm just hitting on some of the basic things right off the bat here, but another one would be, watershed. You don't want issues where, maybe your water table isn't that far down and you may have water problems if you put a big pit in or something like that. And maybe raising your driveway and putting in some sort of a low profile receiving pit is a better way for you to dump those trucks and get that grain moved. Maybe I'll just hit on some of the key things that I get asked a lot in the field or the concerns that I have from the farming community out there. Number one is labor.
Yes.
We all have labor problems. Nobody can find help.
Yep.
And so guys are normally wanting to find a way to turn their trucks around a little quicker so they don't have to have quite as many guys in trucks or as many trucks. And so that's one of the first steps we try to address on the receiving side.
Yep.
Then you get into the types of equipment that we have that we can offer for receiving. Does a double run or a grain pump system work? And is that capacity suitable for what they're trying to do? Are they in a real tight footprint where they may need to go to a leg in a receiving pit or a high flight conveyor that would, reduce the amount of real estate they need to take up with a receiving system? So those are all questions that need to be answered in the beginning stages of a plan. One of the first things that I do when I get on site is to look at what they're dealing with currently.
Yes.
And then we try to evaluate, is this worth saving? And can we use different components of that to build off of for the future?
Right. Yeah, because like on Corey's site, you did save some.
I saved a lot. I mean,
you moved bins.
We moved bins off their pads, took the pads out, and then poured new pads so we could kind of, put them in. Because, it's old bins, but it's still good storage, right?
Sometimes the bins are in perfect shape, and you just need to put a new unload system in when you do that or something like that. Yeah.
And that was one thing that we did, too. We actually turned our unloads 180 degrees to the middle instead of outside where we could hit it with an auger, so we can call it a reclaim system or whatever. We can drag all that to one unload spot. Right. So grain handling efficiency and loading, not having to try to get an auger unfroze from the ground and move it to the next bin.
Exactly. Which brings up one of my other points I guess I wanted to make today too is when you start planning for new grain bins or grain storage, whether it's a drying bin, storage bin, cooling bin, whatever type of grain storage you're putting up, if you look at pads that were poured in 1970, 1980, they're all 3 inches off the ground or level with the dirt. And I mean, we don't make any money on concrete, but put your money into some concrete.
Right.
Get that bin up off the ground, 18 inches to 24 inches minimum. And some of the commercial bins, you see them now sitting on 6 foot, 7 foot stem walls with 6 foot tunnels going through them. So concrete is not a place to save money.
Yes.
It is a place where you want to spend some money. That is the foundation for what you're building.
Yep.
It needs to be there for a long time.
Yep. Which hurts because concrete is high.
Concrete
and
can
the
be
labor
expensive.
for it.
But so can a bin that settles in unevenly.
Right.
Those costs can be extremely expensive. So the next thing that we look at is when you start talking about, putting up a large grain dryer or a sizable grain bin, or whether it's a tower with legs in it, these things are all going to take some extensive concrete work. And it starts with a soil test. And there's a lot of guys that really cringe at spending, $4,000 to $7,000. I'm just shooting some rough numbers here. Don't hold me to these.
$8,000.
Yeah, it could be $8,000 on a soil test to find out what their compaction rate is on that facility or on that farm. But I will tell you that that's probably some of the best insurance money spent, because once you have those numbers back, then an engineer can take that and design your foundations accordingly so that what you build won't settle unevenly.
Yep.
They can almost predict to the half inch how much that facility will settle that structure will settle once that you build on that soil type, if if they've designed it accordingly.
We had the bin builders say they did I would call it a virgin ground, groundbreaking to put a new bin site, probably about 20, 30 miles from us, and said they had to dig, I can't remember how big, of piers down, and it was an absurd amount of concrete. I mean, it's a lot of concrete for a bin, period, but then when you have to put the pillars in because they don't have the...
Exactly.
Oh, my God.
And Iowa, I mean, it's amazing to me in Iowa, there's 4,500 pound soil in Iowa, and you can go 10 miles down the road and find 1,500 pound soil. So never assume that your soil is adequate. You just can't.
Yep. Man, yeah.
So anyway, those are some of the key initial things that we talk about.
Yeah, and that's wild to me because all these initial things has nothing to do with the size of the bin.
Well,
it has nothing to, I mean,
that's
there's
correct.
so many things that you are considering before how many bushels am I putting up.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right.
And every situation is different, right? On every farm, what you need, what do you want for holding capacity of wet grain? What do you want for drying capacity? How many bushels do you want to store?
I think that's a really good thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it is a key question that I get asked quite often is how big a wet bin do I need?
Right.
How big, I don't know what size dryer I should get.
Yeah.
So here's a few key things, for the audience listening. If you're trying to decide, how big a dryer you want, I always figure them on a 24-hour run cycle.
Okay.
Because these new dryers, the technology in them, you should be able to run them around the clock.
Yep.
They have capabilities of being monitored through your cell phone service or whatever. You can be able to check in with your dryer and see what's going on.
Yep.
Now, I want to say, as a disclaimer, that it never replaces human eyes on site looking at that dryer.
Yes.
They have to be checked. They have to be checked for calibration. You cannot just assume things are running perfectly.
Yep.
So don't ever just leave a dryer run for 24 hours without checking things. That's not a good plan.
Yep.
But a 24-hour run cycle will give you a good idea of what you need for a dryer. So if you figure, and it's going to depend on region too, because down in Missouri, a lot of my guys are looking at 5-point numbers. In other words, they're going to take corn out of the field at 20 to 21%, and then try and dry it down to 15. Whereas sometimes in Iowa, guys want to start at 25, 27, somewhere in that range, and dry it down to 15%. So those are two different numbers. Now, the literature on our website, or if you come to a farm show like this and you can grab some literature here, it'll tell you a 10-point removal number as well as a 5-point removal number. Then you have to make a decision on how big your storage bins are as to whether you can cool that grain in those bins or whether you need to cool it in the dryer before it goes into those bins. And so that will determine, the size of some storage bins. It may determine what the airflows are on those bins. Just to give the audience some rough numbers, it takes roughly a third to a half a CFM, that's cubic feet per minute of airflow, for a cooling bin. So if you're going to dump corn out of a full heat dryer, it's probably going to dump somewhere in that 130 to 150 degree kernel temperature range into a storage bin and then try and cool it.
Yeah.
You're going to need a third to a half of CFM when that bin is full to get that accomplished.
But then that's a calculation too, like how high, maybe you only half fill it and then run it. Is there a calculator for that?
It depends on your process. Now, the way I like to, and this is just an opinion, all right, but the way I like to set up a cooling bin, I like to use 2 fans on a bigger cooling bin.
Okay.
And I got some limitations on what I'll promote for cooling bins. I don't like to go over 10 rings tall in a cooling bin.
Okay.
And now ours are wide core rings, so that gives you an eave height of about 37 feet.
Okay.
Once you start getting above that, it gets a lot harder to get that grain cooled down, especially in the upper levels of the bin. Another process that we always discuss on site is coring.
Yeah.
When you're putting hot corn in those bins, it's critical that you core that bin at least once, if not twice, even during the fill process.
Okay.
Where you pull a load out, and if you got your site designed right, or if you've got the capability of just running that into a leg and back up and around, you can dump it right back in the bin. I don't care. But just get that center loosened up and allow that air to move up through the bin.
And the reason for that is?
If you don't, you're going to have a column of stuck grain in the middle of the bin, and it
what's
just will
causing
never
that?
cool down. It's the heat and the moisture.
Okay.
And if you dump hot corn into a bin, you're dumping that corn in there probably around 16.5 to 17% moisture, and then you're relying on the cooling process to remove the last 1.5 to 2 points.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of water coming out of that grain, even in that cooling process.
Yeah.
If you figure, I've got to try to remember all my numbers here, but I want to say that if you take 10 points of moisture out of a bushel of corn, that's close to a gallon of water.
Wow.
And so if you're removing 2 points out of a 50,000 bushel bin, think about how many gallons of water that
That's
is
a lot of
in
water.
steam,
And
vapor
you gotta
coming out of the
push
top of
that
bin.
water through the top vents with
That's
your fans.
right. That's exactly right. And that's another reason that when you get into some 48-foot bins, even 42s, you're starting to see some power roof exhausters on those bins, where guys, will add a powered vent up there. That
You pointed some out on the way out here.
Yep.
Yeah, so you see them all the time on big commercial bins, but I'm seeing them more on farm now because it does allow to keep that. It's almost like an air exchange. It uses the lower gravity vents to bring air into the bin roof, and then it's taking that air and moving it back out through the power roof exhauster. And so any of that moisture and any farmer out there that's dried corn and put it in a bin hot knows how much condensation and water runs down the inside of that roof and down the inside of your walls.
Yep.
That power roof exhauster will certainly help get rid of that and get it out of the bin. So, we're talking to a very large audience here. So there's a lot of different. I don't want to just paint this as a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yep.
But that's the one-size-fits-all solution. It's not.
Exactly right.
Right.
Yeah, because
You
the
can't
customers
just assume your neighbor did it, and that was the way it's going to be.
Exactly right. When you get into Minnesota and up into the Dakotas, you're dealing with totally different drying environments than what you are dealing with down in southern Iowa or Missouri, Arkansas, whatever it may be. So the key factor here is communication, making sure we as representatives of SUCUP or our dealers are very aware of what your plan or what you want to try to accomplish in the end of this project.
Yep.
And we can build toward that.
So let's start from the beginning. You pull in with a semi or a wagon, and you got a load of corn, and you need to get it into a bin. And there are several ways to skin that cat. You can do an auger, you could have a double run, you could have a leg or with a drag or a pit.
We actually have a new what we call a triple run conveyor that will allow you to dump both hoppers of your truck at the same time, and it brings it to a center receiving conveyor. It's all run off the same motor. It's a low profile unit. So again, there is no one best answer for this. I've got certain dealers that or certain customers, throughout my territory that are using double runs to dump trucks into, and then that goes up to the top of a bin. Now that requires a little longer footprint because that double run's angle can only go to about 45 degrees.
Right.
And you have to remember too, when you start turning that equipment up on that kind of an angle, your capacity is cut almost 1% for every degree of incline.
Right.
And so that you size it accordingly for that. A lot more facilities, it seems like in today's world, are going to towers with legs. That has just become more and more popular. Legs aren't all that expensive, but towers can get spendy.
Legs, it's the towers.
Right.
I can tell you that.
Yeah, and then you can almost double the price of a tower if you want to put stairs on it. So it's all based on wind load, and we all know we're working across Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa.
Yeah.
We've seen some pretty serious derechos, wind storms that have taken out grain facilities. So these are all designed according to that.
Yeah, I legit saw a post on, I think, the Facebook grain marketing discussion, which isn't the best place to get your information from, but people were literally not putting stairs on their towers, and in lieu of that, spending $80,000 on like this huge 135-foot lift.
Oh, wow.
Right? And then they could use it for other things on the farm. And I'm like, so not to not sell any stairs for you, but
yeah,
that's kind of interesting.
I have never priced a lift versus stairs, so I don't know what the price difference there is. But I think that you just hit on something else, and that the key thing there is research.
Yeah.
Really digging into what you want and what's available to you in the marketplace. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to filling your grain bins, and then maybe you've already got a leg there that you can utilize for part of it. Maybe it's the leg you're going to now use to fill the dryer.
Yep.
It's going to be dedicated to just filling the dryer.
Right.
There's so many options that you run into when you get into these things.
Yep. What else do you want to cover in this segment, Tanner? We're going to do a couple different segments talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I like so far. I've been taking the notes that the approach is they should reach out to somebody. Obviously, we'd love for them to reach out to a SUCUP dealer, but somebody needs to come out to the site, have a discussion, and then based upon the discussion and the plans after you've laid eyes on a site, it'd be nice to get soil test to be able to see if you could actually do what we want to do on the site. And then after those two first pieces is when you really start to dive into the options.
Yeah, which piece of equipment you want to utilize to tackle that task, whether it's the wet side, the dry side, the cooling, in the bin. I talk about cooling. I can't stress enough the importance of understanding how airflow works in these grain bins. One of my partners that works at SUCUP, his name's Kerry Hartwig. Him and I have been doing the last couple of years some seminars on grain management and bin management and things of that nature, and just we also focus on our products and things like that in these meetings, but they've been more dealer focused, where we have a dealer that sponsors the meeting, and then they invite in some of their customers. I would encourage your customers or your visitor or your audience here, if they can find one of those to attend, it's not a bad thing to go to.
Right.
And I hear feedback after the meeting that, we've been to tons of meetings on micronutrients, and we've been to tons of meetings on how the planters work and on how to combine, but we've never been to anyone that talks about what I can and can't do in that grain bin.
Right.
And just to throw out a few more things for your audience to think about. And I hear sometimes when they come into the booth and they'll say, well, grain bin's a grain bin.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
There's working grain bins. There's bins that are designed for storage. There's commercial bins versus farm bins. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see commercial bins more and more on farm all the time.
Yep.
And I would encourage your audience to do some price checking. Don't just assume that commercial bin is going to be way more expensive than a farm bin.
Yep.
If you live in central Iowa and you follow the Highway 30 corridor, and thousands of bins got knocked out, or at least 1,000 bins got knocked out in that derecho back in 2020, I would tell you that a good majority of those that got replaced are probably commercial bins. Yep. They were farm bins at the time, non-structured, non-structured roofs and things like that. They were replaced with commercial bins, and the price difference is not that much. And then when you go to a commercial bin, your anchoring system is beefier. You got your stiffeners up the sidewall. You've got a structured roof. We jumped to a 15,000 pound roof, and understanding all that is really important when you're on the farm, because maybe you're only filling it with an air system right now, and you don't need that heavy roof. But your son down the road might decide, I don't want to do this with an air system. I've added 3 more bins. I want to put a leg up with some catwalks and conveyors.
Right.
Well, having those structured roofs, now he can land some catwalks up there, or he can hang a catwalk with a conveyor from bin to bin, because those structured roofs can handle it.
Right.
And so what costs you a couple $1,000s more today might save you in towers and structure later $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. So it's all part of that planning and laying out the future and what you want to do and where you want to end up at someday.
Is there a certain size bin that it just makes sense to go commercial?
When you start getting into your 42s, 48s, I would at least get a quote.
Yep.
It takes our dealers a few minutes to knock out a quote. And if you get a quote on a farm bin, non-stiffened with a 5K roof, like a 42.7, and then you compare it to a 42.7 commercial stiffened with a 15K roof, it may be $5,000. I don't know. I'm just throwing out wild numbers, but it may be shocking to you that it's not as much as you thought. It may be a closer number than what you think it is.
It's probably important to know that the other way, too, if you're getting a quote from a different company.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're like, well, what are they quoting you?
Yeah, apples to apples is so important.
Yeah.
And one thing I get to see a lot of is bids. And so it's amazing to me when you see some of these bids, there's no line items really. It's just kind of a general description, but there's no real detail of what you're getting.
Yep.
And your audience members are spending thousands, millions of dollars at times for some of this stuff.
Yep.
You need to know what you're getting.
Right.
And take the time to dig into it and figure out, what are the apples to apples comparisons.
So you said one thing in the beginning that you would look at was power and whether you had 3-phase or not. And I know there's a lot of variability of, my dad only had to pay $5,000 because it was right by his farm. So it's like no brainer. But I've heard like some horror stories. It's $50,000 or $75,000 to get it. What does having 3-phase get you? I mean, I kind of understand, but I'm not an electrician.
Well, 3-phase, just to give you an example, if you decided you wanted to put a leg in, you don't find very many legs that run under 15 horsepower. Mm-hmm. 15 horsepower is going to be the maximum we can do on single-phase power. And that even limits you on some of your fan selection, depending on how big the bin is. It may limit you on the unload capacity of your bin, depending on what you want to put on there for an unload. So we can put bigger motors on single-phase power. Mm-hmm. We have some power conversion systems in Sheffield that we design and build that are based on frequency drive, basically
variable frequency drives.
Yep, exactly. And so we are capable of running some 30, 40, 50 horsepower motors on single phase power. But sometimes the misconception there is they don't understand that it's still single phase amp draw. Mm-hmm. So it's a 15 horsepower single phase motor is probably going to pull somewhere in the mid 70s for amps.
Right.
You put a 50 horse on single phase power and you're talking a lot of amp draw. You could chew up a service just on one motor.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage 3-phase power gives you, is that it cuts your amp draw in half. When you are looking at single phase versus 3-phase, you're basically, for a 15 horse motor, cutting that amp draw in half.
And that cheapens up your motors and all that?
Perhaps. I mean, it doesn't always cheapen the motor too much, but it allows you to put a lot more motor on that service.
Right.
So a lot more horsepower on that service.
Okay.
God, these are all good questions. I'm not stopping. We're gonna keep.
Oh,
We're
you
gonna
wanna
keep
keep
going.
going?
Yeah,
Okay.
I like this.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot through the process. We haven't gotten to now methods of unloading our bins. Corey told us what he did at his family is he took and turned some unloads into the middle and is going to have a single draw. Is that what you called it? A single,
I kind of call it like a reclaim.
A reclaim.
It's a drag.
a drag.
Yep.
So
What are ways to unload bins? Because that's going to be something I'm going to think about as well.
Okay, so I want to add something to where your thought process is
Yeah.
going here first. One of the advantages that, like Corey's going to hopefully take advantage of with his system, is probably playing the blending game.
Yep.
All right. So one of the first things I look at when I go to a farm is there a way for these guys? What does their reclaim system look like?
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to load trucks out of this? Does each individual bin have a vertical logger on it, and it's just going to fill that truck,
Yeah.
from that bin?
Yep.
Now, and that was kind of the old way of doing things. But in today's world, we're all trying to make profit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the name of the game, profit.
Yep.
And one of the key ways to do that is to be able to blend. And if you can take advantage of blending, you can do a lot. And so being able to have some sort of a reclaim system that would bring that back to a central loadout point where I can pull from 1 or 2 or 3 bins or more, whatever, and be able to do some of that blending, that's going to save you money. So when you start talking layout and adding, and this is sometimes where you get into trouble with adding on to old systems because they weren't set up to be able to do that.
Yep.
And blend and reclaim wasn't a thought back then. So sometimes it does require you to pull your floor, change your unload direction, do some of that kind of stuff so that you can now start pulling grain back into a central loadout point. So when you want to talk about just like the under the bin unloading system, I would start with the standard, which would be like our power sweep system. Mm-hmm. It's going to come in an 8 or a 10-inch unload system. One key thing I can tell guys too is when you're putting a power sweep in, let's just say, and I've run into this quite a bit, guys want 10-inch unloaders under their bin.
Yep.
But what they don't realize is that you got to have at least a 12-inch auger to take that away.
Yeah.
All right? You can't go from 10 to 10.
Yep.
Because that 10-inch auger coming out is going to dump 5,000 bushel an hour on you. That 10-inch auger taking grain up to your truck is at an incline, and you might get 3,000 or 4,000 out of it.
Yep.
So now you're channeling the gate shut, which works okay until you decide to turn the power sweep on.
Yeah.
And then you're going to bust things up because that power sweep has to have that gate open, so you can clear that grain out of there and have it run the way it's supposed to. So size and all that stuff is very critical, but I'd start with the power sweeps. That's probably our most common unloading system still for the grain bins.
Yep.
Now that may come out of the bin and then dump into something else that would allow you to do the blending part of it. A new system that some of the things that are becoming more popular is guys are jumping away from the power sweeps here as we get into these bigger bins, these 60, 70,000, maybe up to 150,000 bushel bins that are going on farm now, and they're putting conveyors under the floor and running them clear through the bin. So, obviously you want to run it clear through the bin if you do a conveyor because you got to have your tighteners and your chain, that stuff out at the back side of the bin so you can get to it. But what that allows them to do is now pull grain all the way across that bin before they have to run a sweep. So it just empties out more grain.
Yep.
Another thing they might want to take advantage of, and there's some do's and don'ts with this too, and that's side draw systems on a bin. So when you start getting up to your 10 plus ring tall bins, we've got some 30 ring bins out there now, and if you can utilize a side draw system to load trucks into, from the side draw, it really cheapens up your unloading power.
Because that's just gravity,
It's
right?
just gravity flowing out, yeah. Now there's some baffles that get installed up the inside of that bin wall. Not all bins are designed for side draws, and so I run into this quite often too, where a guy wants to put a side draw on an old bin he's got.
Yeah.
Well, they weren't designed for that, and it puts an enormous amount of stress on the sidewall of a bin when you side draw. So they have to have the internal baffles that go up above them. They've got to be designed for that. It usually requires maybe even a heavier roof load to take that extra stress. But by utilizing the side draw, they don't have to turn an unload on until they get that bin down and to the 5th or 6th ring. So it really does empty out a lot of the grain without having to run extra power.
Is there a correct process to side draw? I've seen some things online, cause obviously everyone just used to take it right out of the middle and it's even pressure all the way around.
That's correct.
I mean, so is it you take a couple loads out of the side draw, then you go back to the middle? How does that work?
So if you've got a, I'm just going to speak on Sukup's behalf right now, okay? So if you order a Sukup bin designed for side draw unloading, that bin will be, you can go ahead and unload all that grain out of the side draw until it stops, until you're done. Yep, you don't have to core the center out. Now, I'm gonna add some disclaimers to that. And I've been to some sites where they've done this. What you cannot do is when you have created the angle of repose on the grain as it's coming out of the bin, that grain, dry grain is probably going to be around that 22, 23 degree angle. As you get that side draw emptied out and the grain quits running, you cannot refill on that grain until you center core it and get it all even back up. Okay? So I've been to a couple sites where guys have bought a side draw bin and they love it because they don't have to run any unload.
Yep.
And what they're doing is they bring it down until it quits running, and then they start transferring from bin 2, bin 3, bin 4 into that bin and running it out the side draw. That's a big-time no-no, unless that bin is designed to simultaneously load and unload through the side draw. And that just takes a much heavier bin. The initial cost of that grain bin is going to be more because it has to be designed to be able to do that. Otherwise, what you're going to see is some deflection in that side wall, and it can be pretty bad.
What about your initial fill? You got fresh concrete there. The local co-op's got 400,000 bushel bins. I know they could only fill it so far, and then they had to unload it and all that. So, can you side draw when you're trying to let your bin settle?
You can, but let's just talk about the fill side of it first,
Yeah.
okay? So on the fill side of it, if your bin is taller than it is wide, you should only fill a third of it and then wait 7 days. And then check it with, check the concrete, make sure you've got even settlement, and then go ahead and fill the next third and then the next third. But you want to check that for even settlement on the concrete. Now, this is only on the first year. After that's, then you don't have to worry about it
And are
anymore.
you measuring from like the soil surface to the concrete, or
Basically, you're going to set grade,
Yeah.
with your I can't even think of the term I'm looking for. What checks the concrete? Like when you're checking grade on,
A level?
no, it's the
just tape measure?
laser, oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for?
laser level?
I can't even
don't-
think of it. You know what I'm
No,
talking
I'm
about,
not-
don't you?
No.
When you're doing dirt work out there and they set up their little tripod with their stick.
Oh my gosh, I want to say transit.
Yeah, there
there
you
you
go.
go.
Jeez, I couldn't think of the
Yeah.
word.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there we go.
guys.
Yep.
I'm not a concrete guy either, so
Yeah.
you can see that.
Yep.
Anyway, you set up your transit, then you just
Yeah.
go around and shoot the bin in 3 or 4 places to make sure you're getting even settlement on
Okay.
that bin.
Yep.
And commercial facilities, the bigger the bin, the more you got to pay attention to that.
Yep.
But it's not a bad idea even for farms to check that.
Right.
You get a 60-foot, 12-ring bin out there, that's 120, 150,000 bushel grain bin.
Yeah. Well, it just kind of worried me. Yes, the fill part, but then if you start side drawing on fresh, 1 year concrete, or it was poured a month or two ago, it's
Right.
like,
I wouldn't start side drawing initially. I would,
Yeah.
get the bin full, let it settle, let it do its thing.
plus you want a core,
Yeah,
right?
and you're going to
So
core out of the middle. That's
Can
correct.
you core and then side draw?
Yes.
Okay.
In time. I would definitely look at your instruction manual and see what
Right.
it's telling you that you can and can't do on that.
Okay.
So it's better to be safe than sorry. So, I would tell you to let it settle, let it, fill it, core it, do the things through the middle
Yep.
that first year.
Yep.
And that way everything's even, your compression's even, and then you can start doing your off-center unloading and things like that through your side draw.
Yep. It's just a bunch of stuff you don't ever think about.
I'm learning a ton.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting back here. It's probably the least amount of words I've said on an episode, but I'm taking it all in. This is
The critical
good.
thing with side draws is just remembering that you cannot refill them until you core the center back out and get it all leveled back up. And
Right.
then you can refill.
Because I, in my mind, had the two options is either you get it into a truck auger that augers it into a semi, or you have overhead bins. Like, those were the two limitations that I had in my mind.
Yeah.
And there's more considerations.
Oh, many more.
What's capacity of a side draw? I know we know the capacity of a 10-inch auger at this incline.
I want to say it's around 8,000 bushel an hour, but
Okay.
I don't have that number memorized.
I
in my
do
head,
see
so.
the pictures on the farm screw-up pages of not
pile
getting
of
it
corn.
shut off. Yes.
Yeah.
You can't look away for very long, it appears.
Right.
Some of those side draws fill trucks full pretty fast.
Oh, they can. They're real fast. And so what'll happen is, and I've seen this happen in the field, is if you do, if that bin is not designed for side draw unloading, or if your guy plugs his center sump, which happens a lot,
Yep.
all right? You plug your center sump, the first thing that guys want to do is open their intermediates, because it's another way for them to get grain out of that bin. Well, that first intermediate is going to be pulling grain right down that inside wall, all right? And when that bin is full, it puts an enormous amount of stress on the side wall of the bin. And it can pop anchors even. I've seen that happen. So that is not how our practice is normally to get a grain bin working again if you've plugged your center sump. Carrie and I, when we do our presentations, we focus a lot on grain management because we want to prevent what causes the plugging problem.
Right.
All right. We don't want to be reactive. How do we fix it now that it's plugged? It's how do we stop it from getting plugged? So proper airflows, maintaining, checking that grain bin, making sure that your top is not, crusting over and you're not having issues up there on the top. Sometimes it involves putting snow kits on your roof vents, so that we make a snow kit for those. It's a poly plate basically that covers the screen so that, in our blizzard conditions in Nebraska and Dakotas and Iowa, that we're not blowing snow up into the top of that roof. And they still hinge open. They just have a solid plate on the outside of them that seals them up a bit better. Those preventative measures really make a world of difference in the safety of the operation of that bin.
Besides you guys educating people, is there calculators? Is there an app? Does Iowa State put out stuff? Like, how do
So yes.
Yeah.
To answer your
Where do I
question,
find that?
so SUCOP has an actual airflow calculation program that all of our dealers have access to.
Okay.
And I would tell your audience, if you have grain bins on your site, you should have a printed airflow calculation page that tells you what the airflow is on those bins at every ring of height.
Yep.
And that page, that computer program will tell them that. It'll also tell them how many roof vents they should have. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing I run into. And if we want to talk about airflow just for a second here, I'd like to hit on that. A lot of times at farm shows, I'll have a guy come in and he'll tell me, hey, I just, I put a new fan on this bin, but it's not any more better performance. I'm still not getting this air up through the bin. It's not drying like I want it to. It's taking way longer than it should. And they'll tell me, I know I've got good airflow because when I go up to that peak and I open it, man, it about knocks me off the bin roof. I got tons of airflow. That's exactly the opposite of what you should have. When you open your peak lid, you should not have a massive burst of air that knocks your cap off or about knocks you off the roof. It should be a flow of air coming out of there. But if you don't have enough roof vents, it is a huge problem, and it creates a ton of static pressure in the bin. So your fans are trying to blow air into something that can't let air out.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to have an exhaust for that. So this calculation program we have will actually tell them how many square foot of roof vent opening they need to have on those bins. And I've been to a number of sites on these older bins especially where there is no roof vents in these bins. They just didn't put them in back in the day. 10,000 bushel bin, 5,000 bushel bin. And they're trying to blow air into those and there's no vents.
Yep.
So it's critical you have venting.
Yep. But that's not just the only, CFMs isn't the only calculation, right? You have how hot did the corn go in, what moisture, what's the ambient temperature and humidity, like how does a guy figure all that out?
Yeah, so that's all built into the program as well. It depends on if it's a drying bin or if it's a cooling bin or if it's a storage bin. All those things take different airflows and different calculations. So we have to know all that information in order to provide. Now the airflow is not going to change much because once you put a fan on there of certain horsepower and it's grain and you get the same grain depths, it's going to be the same CFM per bushel. But it's really important, I'll just throw out some numbers here. For a natural air drying system, I want at least 1 CFM per bushel. So a lot of guys want to take a 48-foot 9-ring bin and try to natural air dry in it. It's almost impossible to do that because you can't get enough airflow through that. I can't put enough fans on there.
Yeah.
My static pressure just goes crazy high, and I'm not pushing enough air to get the upper levels of that bin dried down. Mm-hmm. All right? You'll over dry the bottom and not get the top dried out. Now there are bin management systems out there that can help with some of that, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that because that's not a product that we offer yet. But it's something that you can certainly do your research on that and see if there's something out there that fits your needs. Mm-hmm. If that's an environment that would work in for you, I can tell you that what works out in Kansas will not work in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Their climates are just totally different, and what that grain can dry down to is totally different. You take a Kansas day and you could probably get your grain dried down to 11% if you let the fans run long enough because it's dry humidity or less humidity and dry and hot air. Mm-hmm. You go out to Ohio in harvest season in October and it's 50 degrees and 75% humidity and you can let your fans run forever and the most it's ever going to get down to is 17, 18%. So it's and I'm just throwing wild numbers there. Don't hold me to those numbers. We actually have equilibrium charts that would show all that, but
That's good.
What about, I learned this in the dryer class that SUCOP sent me to. What do you do with the temperature of your corn grain during the winter, and how do you manage that?
So a lot of guys love to freeze their corn. They'll take it down to freezing as soon as the temperatures get that low. That would not be our recommendation. We would like to see guys take grain down to about 35 degrees. And it's going to hold just as well at 35 degrees as it does at 30.
Yep.
All right. The reason we like it staying at 35 degrees is once you freeze corn or freeze grain, I'll just say grain in general, when it starts to thaw back out, it creates a lot of moisture and condensation and issues there that cause spoilage and problems. And I would tell you that in the spring is actually probably the most critical because you can keep it cold over the winter months. That's fine. Get it down to 35 degrees, keep it cold over the winter months. As it warms up in the spring, you want to bring that grain temperature, try to keep it within about 10 degrees of the ambient outside air temperature, but stop at about 50 or 55, right in that range, and then stop there. If you do that, you won't have to deal with your bug issues and that kind of stuff. It just keeps the grain in good condition without having to. Right. It should get you through to the April, May, June months that we all love to sell corn in because that's usually your best profit months.
Yeah.
So.
What about long-term holding? The guys that are multi-year.
Okay, so let's talk about long-term holding. Long-term holding, the one thing that will change is the moisture you store at.
Okay.
So instead of bringing corn into a bin at, say, 16 and then holding it at 15 or 15 and a half, and trying to, or maybe I talked to a guy yesterday that was selling to an ethanol plant. The ethanol plant doesn't dock under 17, so he wants to hold it at 16.9.
Yeah, because you're losing money in water.
Exactly right. So short-term storage on 16.9, you can hold it for quite a while with the right airflows in the bin. But you're not going to hold it for over a year. You know what I'm saying? If you're going to hold grain for more than a year, you probably need to be under 15%, maybe even down to 14 for longer-term holding.
Yep.
So, and there's charts out there, guys. Research that. Don't just take my word for it. Get into it. Look at the numbers. Find out what you can hold grain for.
Store and ignore. That's what they would call
Store
that.
more, profit later.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yes, there's our slogan right there.
That's right. Well, I think the only other piece that I want to hit on in this episode structure, because we could go so much further in depth on dryer types and the functionalities, when it's best to have which style. We could also, like you said, go way deeper into the grain handling side of things. But what I want to touch just high level on is, what about exploring technology and what's available? How do you help somebody that's trying to plan their site get up to date for tech, or know how much tech they need or want?
They usually tell me that. It takes me about 4 seconds to figure out if that guy is interested in anything really in-depth technical-wise or technology-wise, or whether they're like me and I just soon not have all that. I'm better just in person looking at things and figuring things out rather than having to just look at all the software and those types of things. Now, we can go both ways. So I'll just speak on our dryers real quickly without giving too many things away here. But, we have a QuadraTouch Pro controller on there that has options of, I'm just going to pick on our new mixed flow dryer a little bit. We've got that vacuum cool mixed flow dryer. So that's some technology that's patented by Sukup. Nobody else has that out there. It's a feature that if you're dealing with a bin that's 50,000 bushel or more and you don't want to put hot corn in those bins, it is the perfect dryer for you to look at. So I guess that falls into more option than maybe technology, but it is something that we came up with that nobody else has out there. So, and then you put that QuadraTouch Pro controller on there. We write all of our own software in-house, so we're not farming any of that stuff out. So if there is a problem, we can take care of it. Got a lot of guys want to know, can I watch the dryer on my cell phone? Can I see it that way? Is there any controlling features that I can be sitting in a meeting in Kansas City and running my dryer in Boone, Iowa? Yes, there are.
Yep.
But again, I started out this conversation by saying you never ever that doesn't ever replace the set of eyes that are on site that can run that dryer. Another key piece of advice I would give anybody looking to buy a dryer, these farm sites anymore, it's not a one-person show. There's normally, and Corey, you're just, I know you got a family involvement in yours, and I know we talked about this when we did that dryer school. You pick one guy, one guy is going to run the dryer. Now, the rest of you might be able to see it, but you don't want 4 different people trying to make changes to this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it's got the technology to let them do that.
Yeah.
But it's a bad idea because once, if Joe changes it and then Henry's there and he changes it and Joe's like, what happened? I just changed this. And it's just a constant problem.
Yep.
And things don't settle out. So you pick one guy that's going to be your guy, that's going to be the operations guy.
Yeah.
That can run some of that stuff.
But make sure everyone knows at least how it functions and how to, in case you're sick.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And the thing I like about the technology side of Sukup is that it can be pretty simple too. you can make it as advanced as you want. It's very custom. So like the dryer controls, if you want to be really in depth and do a lot of things you can set a number of different timers, delays, all kinds of things you want to do. You can make them very site specific, and that's what the technology allows us to do. And then you add, like the moisture controlling. That's a big key factor. We came out with 4-point temp sensing, and I'm going to let Brandon talk about some of that stuff probably at a later episode here. But there's a ton of stuff out there. And then we talked about grain bins. How do you know what's going on in that grain bin? Well, there's companies out there that make temp cables and monitoring systems. And those are things that you should research and see if it's something that would work into your system.
You guys don't make any of that currently?
We offer them through Sukup, but we don't currently produce them ourselves.
Yep.
So we have the access to them, but we don't produce them. So, but stay tuned.
I think there's some pretty cool stuff that's coming in that market.
Yep.
No, I like this. This has been everything I wanted this episode to be and more because of your level of expertise. And we know that we didn't get into the specifics on anything. And that was kind of the point.
Yeah, no, I wanted this to be very general because I want customers out there, your audience to know. The one thing I can tell them is ask. Don't be afraid to call us because we will come out and help. We will work with our dealers. And as with any business, I've got dealers that have been doing this for 40 years. I've got dealers that have been doing this for 1 year. And sometimes those dealers need some help, and or another set of eyes. And that's what we're for. We're there to help. So.
One thing I don't think you'll have an answer for, and I don't know if anyone would, but I've always heard, how do you know how much grain storage you need? I've heard don't build storage for rented ground or, things of that nature, because you just don't know. It could be gone next year.
I don't know if I have the magic answer for that, but I can tell you this. When Carrie and I do these seminars, if you look back, and we have researched this, if you look back at the history of grain storage and selling in that April, May, June timeframe.
Yep.
Those are your key months. And I think 9 out of 10 years, it's profitable. It's more profitable to sell in those months than it is any other time.
Yep.
So if you can carry grain that far, 9 times out of 10, you're going to make more money than you would if you sold it out of the field.
Just not last three.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, that's typically, if you look at those numbers, that's what it is.
Yep.
And, I can't speak per year, obviously, but if you look at the trends and what it's been over the years, that's typically been the case. And then if you add into that the ability to blend, the ability to control your own drying costs and your own drying, those things all start weighing into the whole overall profitability of your farm site.
Right.
And so to me, storage is important. Now, granted, I'm a little biased.
Right.
But I've had numerous guys come back and tell me, I paid for that bin in a year.
Yeah.
Or I paid for that bin in 2 years.
Right.
And I would bet that most of your audience can say that same thing. If they bought a bin anytime in the last 20 years, they probably found that to be true.
So the co-op makes their money blending.
Sure
a lot of
they
money blending grain. They do some other ways too, but is there a calculation there? Like I should have 17% corn in this bin and 15 and then...
Here's what I would tell you. If you're a really good manager of your grain bins and you understand airflows and you understand how to manage that grain and how to turn it, you can play with some of that.
Yep.
If you are going to put that grain in that bin in October and not look at it again until May or June, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Because you're taking that's a pot of gold sitting there. You take that grain bin that's holding 50,000 bushel, and even at today's prices, that's still $250,000 sitting there. So it's something that you got to be very comfortable playing around with that.
Right, but we are farming for profit, and that's a possible opportunity.
It is.
For you to not pay for a couple points of moisture here.
Exactly right.
Or even if it gives you options, if you happen to get some fines or something, and it starts heating up, and you can kind of...
Exactly. I would definitely tell you, if you're going to try and do that game or play that game, you probably want some sort of monitoring in that bin so you know what's going on. And again, you're going to control how long it can stay in that grain bin.
I wonder if the co-ops have any calculation or people that... Because they've obviously been doing it for a long, long time.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of the process. What's the most profitable to do? Be kind of cool to look into.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot, and this has been fun.
Yeah, very fun. I appreciate the time.
You don't get out of here without the question we ask every one of our guests.
Oh, what's that?
So what do you enjoy most about working with farmers?
I am one. So it makes it so much more fun because I'm a product of the 80s. I graduated high school in the late 80s. At that time, farming was not all that fun. It was pretty rough.
Yep.
And I remember my dad asking me when I was a senior in high school, so if you want to farm, I'll bring you into this. And I thought, ugh,
Yeah.
not what I wanted to do. But what I found at Sukup was a home that puts me back out in the environment of the clientele that I'm most familiar with. And I love that. So we still have some small, a couple small farms up in the northern Iowa area for my family, and my brother and I get to play in the dirt every year, and we enjoy that. And I moonlight on the weekends helping. He's a dealer actually for Sukup up in that area, but we put in bin floors and power sweeps, so I get my hands dirty on that stuff and enjoy it. And then I get to go out in the fall and work with these guys. A lot of times if the dealer can't figure something out or that, with the dryer running, I get to go out and help do some of that. And I love being around these guys. They're like my family. It's really just kind of a fun environment to be at.
Yep.
And
That's a good answer. I like that a lot.
Yeah, very good.
You're going to have to challenge, since you're the one that's been going through the challenges yourself in a bin site. But the summary, just to kind of go off of, was you got to start by asking questions. You got to start by reaching out and then finding a dealer and someone that can come out and look at the site with you. Take a look around, existing facilities, what you have for space for new. And if you get a site plan put together, let's start off with a soil sample to make sure that site plan is even feasible.
Yep.
Or what we know the additional costs are going to be to figure that out. We want to look at our power capacity.
Yep.
To see if we can get three-phase, if we need three-phase, or what the plan is for future expansion. We want to take into factor your harvesting capacity and what maybe your future harvesting capacity would be, plus then your goals and targets for drying grain, because you need to factor in the sizing of how quickly everything can go through that process of drying to even cooling, like you mentioned.
Yep.
That will help you with the size of wet bin and the size of whatever else you are going to set up and transfer. Then think about what you want to do for loading and unloading. Whether you're going to just fill a wet bin and transfer everything, you want to set up multiple with the leg and tower, potentially buy a lift.
Well, I don't know if we promote that. That was just something
instead
cool
of
I
stairs,
saw.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And take a look at what we can do with that. Then addressing your bin sizes. Now we can figure out if we wanted to go, like you mentioned, some of the commercial, if you wanted to go with multiple of a smaller size, just managing what your site allows you to have for capabilities there. And then finally, once we have the figured out capacity for what you want to do on the drying side, is we tackle your unload. There's so much more in that, but that's probably high level. And if I missed it in the summary, you just go back and listen to it again.
Yeah.
There was just a couple things I wanted to add.
Do it.
One that I ran into. If you're looking at doing a leg project and you're not familiar with that, check to see how close you are to an airport.
Yeah.
That is one thing I've ran into where, they've realized, ooh, I can't build this leg because I'm too close to the airport.
Yep.
So check that out. If you're close to an airport, find out how close they'll let you build to it with a leg. Second thing, remember the apples to apples comparison. I can't stress that enough. I've seen guys, they're $30,000 less than you guys. Well, yeah, why?
Yeah.
There's usually a reason.
How many pounds of steel are in it?
Pounds of steel, or
Yep.
what are some of the design elements?
Yep.
Are they commercial versus farm, or whatever it may be? Just please dig into that and check apples to apples. It's really important. And then just ask questions.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
My challenge is kind of two-part, kind of maybe one question and one challenge. My first challenge is start early planning. If you think that you might want something, and I'm dealing with myself, we started this over a year ago, and we are up against harvest now and could potentially get into some headaches because labor is short in some areas, parts are short sometimes. It's
Yep.
just, yeah, it can be frustrating. So start early.
Also, if they're going to, taking advantage of some of the drying things that are out there, there are grants.
Yes.
And those grants are really good.
Yep, and we did a show on
Yeah, we've
that.
got a good episode if they want to go back to
Cloberdance Consulting.
Farm Progress show last year. The shows that would have been probably during last harvest.
Yep.
Almost a year ago. There's good information.
The government upped the level of money in those grants within the last year,
Yep.
and so the REAP grant and the EQIP grant are both
Yep.
very good grants, but you have to start early.
Add another 6 to 8 months on top of the year that you should have started.
Yeah.
It's a process, but
But
it's
they
worth
do
it.
pay a lot
It
of
is
money,
worth it.
so-
Yes. Yep. And the second part is it kind of going back to at the apples to apples is know who you're buying from. If you're worried about where your products are coming from and all that, Sukup is a family-owned private company, and I never even thought about this in the industry. I sell seed, right? Like all the seed companies have a good products, right? I'm sure all the bin companies have good products. But Also, I didn't know that they're owned by different like non-ag companies. I saw a tractor company owns one bin company. I saw like a big hedge fund owns another one. I'm like,
Yes.
so that's kind of cool. And you guys have never really talked about that.
Yeah, well, we do, but we do it just with our own, with our
Right.
customers when they're here talking to us one-on-one. But
Right.
it is something that, you take a company in Sheffield, Iowa, a town of 1,200 people, and we're competing against these massive corporation-type companies. So,
I think that's pretty cool. It's,
Yeah.
American, small town America, still staying small town America.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's not an open invitation to come to Sukup anytime you want for a tour, but if you ever have interest in that, like if if you're putting up a new project, or if you want to come in and see what some of our equipment is or how we do it, get a hold of that dealer, and we can get something scheduled with a TM to meet you up there and do that. We love doing that stuff.
And that's a really cool tour.
Yeah.
That is. Yep. Well, this has been a pleasure. This went probably a different route than we originally started, but I loved it. I think this has turned out to be a really good episode, so can't thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
And listeners, if you want to find out, www.sukup.com. But until next time, have a good one.